Hi everyone, it's Jazz here, and I just want to ask you a question. Are you a student who may be struggling with foreign language education, or are you a teacher and you just feel like your students aren't grasping a lot of the content that you're teaching? I want to talk about 4 mistakes that I see teachers doing that can be detrimental to your students and to their learning. I started as a language tutor. I still do teach, I specifically teach adults. I've taught young children. If you've been following me for a long time, you do know that this is it's been a gradual experience. So as a tutor, I do work primarily I work individually with tutoring as well as teaching. But I noticed that especially when certain students come to me with homework help, there are a lot of things that I have to kind of clear up, especially when it comes to understanding, or just even understanding what is being taught. And the first thing I want to talk about is giving them homework that doesn't match what you've already taught them. So I actually had a student who she was in college, and she was taking an introductory French course because she wanted to really work on her on French because in relation to data analysis, and she had career goals in the World Health Organization, and she just really wanted to take French so she would have some form of linguistic grasp on something so that she can take into that career. I noticed that she came to me with some homework from the very first week, and she said, okay, so this is our homework. We have to write a paragraph using these vocabulary words, and we have to talk about use the indefinite articles. And one of the things that I realized was looking at this, I said, right, a paragraph, full sentences. What have you covered so far in this first lesson? She said, we've learned introductory phrases. We've learned, the articles masculine, feminine, and that's pretty much it. I'm like, are you really? Really? So I know that that's at the college level, which is a little bit different. College level, I will just say, is that there's an expectation when there's a language being taught is that students generally have some prior knowledge from high school or beyond, in earlier education. So with college, it's different because that environment is meant to be very resourceful based. It's reliant on the students being resourceful to fill in the gaps, being adults and everything, But I think at the high school level is that's really not the best strategy. Even at lower levels than that, you want to make sure that the homework you're giving is going to match what you've taught them to do. So if you've only taught them to do introductory phrases and not how to write sentences, not how the grammatical structure works for them to even begin writing a sentence, let alone a paragraph, make sure that it matches. You don't want to teach them how to conjugate the indicative tense, and then you have homework that requires them to use a conditional conjugation that you've never taught them before ever. They don't know how to use it. That's the other thing that's going to really going to affect their education. And especially because I've taught students who've said, yeah, after this semester I do not want to take any more of this language because my teacher is teaching this way. So you want to basically, as an educator, I think that it is very important to keep that love of whatever you're teaching going, especially if a student really has potential of doing great things with that language. So that really can help their morale, knowing this homework, whatever, and then it gives them a sense of being able to do it at the best of their ability, rather than just, okay, I'm just going to write some stuff and Google Translate or whatever, or get a tutor to help me write this when I just really just want to, get this done. It's kind of like how James Clear, which I talked about in language consistency, in terms of his book Atomic Habits, where he talks about that learning curve. It's basically the way that it is to prevent boredom, because it's the biggest killer of education. Is you want it to be easy enough on one spectrum where it's not too easy, where it's boring, but you don't want it to be on this end where it's just so challenging that they just mentally give up. Okay. So then second thing I'll just say is telling them to figure it out with no general direction. So one of the students that came to me, I think she's like 14, 15 years old, so she basically was telling me, I'm like, okay, like this is what I have to do. And I have to write these sentences, and all our teachers taught us is like vocabulary and stuff like that. Basically going back to like the first mistake. The second thing I was saying, okay, well in this part, like, you can also use word reference, which I actually recommend a lot as a very effective translation tool. But but yes, so she was saying like, yeah, our teacher tells us to use word reference, but I hate word reference because I never, it's for vocabulary. So my thing is giving them good explanations of what resources you want them to use and what are they for, because not every resource that's widely used is going to be effective for everything. So like I actually, no matter what, I do not recommend Google Translate at all. Because the reason why is that from my perspective is it always gives you literal translation. It never gives you anything that is contextual based. So you might think that the biggest example I always give is like in Brazilian Portuguese, there's a word for like a stuffed sausage. But apparently, like in Google Translate, it will tell you stuffed sausage. That's what that means. But in colloquial Brazilian Portuguese, it literally means someone who incessantly talks on and on and on nonsense. So like someone's talking and you get that in dialogue and it's like, let me Google Translate that. It's like, why are they going on about a stuffed sausage? It's like, no, they're talking about somebody who's going on and on and on. So those are things about like, Google Translate, just as a little side note. That's the reason why Google Translate is never a good option. The only time I would ever use it is like if I'm trying to, it's like if I need quick translations, like, in traveling or something like that, which I rarely ever do because I never travel to a country I don't know the language of. And then on the other aspect, it's more of, just like if I need like certain words, like if I need something quick, like word reference is really great because it gives you all the different contexts, when you're writing things. But if you need something quick, it's going to take a while to go through, like to type in one word and you have to look for which meaning you need, which word corresponds with what you're trying to say, because there are kind of like English, how we have there, they all spell differently, but they sound the same and they have different meanings. So kind of some way similar in the other language and other languages too, where they have different words that it's the same word, but it can mean two different things. Like the word mean, it could be someone who is very rude, or it can mean something like in terms of trying to express context. So like I said, explain what you're using your tools for and make sure that they correspond with what, it's like I don't mind, students, I don't mind teachers giving the concept of, figure it out, but you have to give them like the tools to figure it out. Because once you give it to them, give them the assignment, you've taught them this, they can run with it. The third thing I'll say is not challenging or encouraging your students enough. So my thing on that is, like I said, this is not for every teacher. This is just things that I notice where when I get homework help is sometimes like I'll tell them specifically how, because I teach how native speakers actually communicate. I know like at the AP level, you have more freedom, is more exploratory, but I know like in the beginning, as you're getting the foundation, I do have to be careful with that. Or sometimes I'll say, this is actually how people will say it. And just like saying qu'est-ce que versus c'est quoi. So like, for example, like I was watching a video about like the Swiss accent, and they said, c'est quoi l'accent suisse? What is a Swiss accent? Versus saying the standard way, qu'est-ce que c'est l'accent suisse? Like, so, and then they'll say things like, oh, I don't want to write it that way because I don't want my teacher to think that I cheated. Or, I think that my teacher wants us to write it that way. I will just say, obviously, I have no control over what with the way that a teacher wants it. That I can't argue with. However, I will just say that, that concept, because my theory is that there's no such thing as cheating in foreign language. I mean, if you need to use a translator repetitively, or, using word reference or using these things to help you with your, with your homework, that's fantastic. Because eventually at some point, it's going to get to the point where they won't need those references anymore. So let's say like if you tell them like over and over and over throughout the entire semester, use word reference, use this, use whatever you've got. And then by the time it's time to take the final exam, like, they won't need it anymore because they've been using it repetitively to where it's in their head. So there's an emphasis on memorizing this, like memorizing verb conjugations. Don't, like, focus less on memorizing stuff, because the thing is that language is fluid. From my experience in, traveling as well as teaching and, being in different environments around the world, is that there's no such thing as cheating. Especially if you're at a higher level of teaching, like let's say, if you're teaching like level 3 or above in a language, make sure that, you're telling them, okay, now you have basic grasp. Like 1 and 2 is more like basic stuff. But once you get to like 3, 4, and AP, that's when you want them to just take the language and run with it. Like, find things. Like, don't say like, oh, we have to write it this way, because I'm going to tell you right now, especially if you have students who are very interested in studying abroad or, doing something that involves like an international based career, then, you want them to be exploring, not just like, this is how we speak, the standard. No. No, like, encourage them. Like, if they find new things, like, be like, okay, yeah, like, I would, like, share that with the class, or, all these, like, oh, I've discovered this, that native speakers say, this is a phrase. Encourage that. I know that in public schools, this bureaucracy is a little bit different, but I would just say that the best that you may not have control over what you teach, but you can also have control over how you teach and how you motivate your students to keep learning. My fourth mistake that I see is teaching too much by the book. I know I kind of covered that, but I'm going to go back to it just briefly. Because teaching by the book is just like textbook knowledge. That's one of the things I always, especially because I teach adults who are like, oh, I was taught this in high school and I don't remember much of it, those kinds of students. And so sometimes, like, when they're speaking, I have to correct certain things, like, hey, that's not how native speakers say that, or those particular ways. Like, don't teach so much. I mean, use it as a guide. Like I said, obviously in public education it's different because there's it's more like regulated, I would say, than private sectors. Because I did go to a private school for the first 5 years of my life. I went to a Montessori school. So the way that they teach is very different than public education, because the Montessori method of teaching is more along of teaching students to be autonomous in their own education. And the teacher's more like a facilitator. So it's like, yes, this is what you're teaching, but at the same time, like, have more fun with it. Find, in your free time, if you have it, especially, like, I'm pretty sure like teachers have time before the school year if you have to, do any prep work, finding resources, or, fun activities that will help you be able to get them exposed to how native speakers actually speak. Because the thing that we don't realize is that, yes, we're learning French as an elective in high school, but at the same time is that language that your students are learning, that is a way of life for someone else. If you're learning Spanish, there are literally so many Spanish speaking countries that speak that language, where that is their everyday life. They live and breathe it, helping them make it a part of their identity. It is a big emphasis for me is I always tell my students, like, pretend this is your native language, because no matter what, like I said, it may be fun to learn how to say hola and como estas and all these different phrases, but you need to give them a much more human appeal. So that's something you can't get out of a textbook. So I really hope that this is helpful. As a teacher, I hope this kind of gives you some ideas from a tutor's perspective, because I have to help your students. So things that I've seen, so I really hope that this is helpful. And if you need any extra help with French, Spanish, or German, I will have a link below if you want to work directly with me. And then also we have a lot of more language learning resources on our website through our learning database. So thank you so much, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye.